All right, and big news coming in. U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an order imposing higher tariffs on dozens of countries in his latest bid to reshape global trade in favor of U.S. businesses.
However, in a minor reprieve, the White House did say that the measures will take effect in about a week's time, not today as was previously expected.
Well, the duties ranged as high as 41% on Syria and also included 30% on South Africa, 25% on India, 20% for Taiwan. Well, separately, the White House announced that Canadian imports will face tariffs of 35% and not the current 25%.
Now, Mexico will continue to face 25% tariffs for the next 90 days. The decision to keep the rate steady was taken after Trump's call with his Mexican counterpart, Claudia Sheinbaum. An exemption from Canadian and Mexican goods entering the country under North American Trade Pact also remained in place.
Now, the Trump administration has said the universal tariff will remain at 10%, the same level that was implemented on April 2nd for the countries that U.S. has a trade surplus with, which is most of them. Now, nations with which the U.S. has a trade deficit face a 15% floor.
So far, Washington had announced pacts with Britain, Vietnam, Japan, Indonesia, the Philippines, South Korea and the European Union. But details of those agreements have remained vague.
In a statement on Thursday, Trump said that some countries have agreed to or are on the verge of agreeing to meaningful trade and security commitments with the U.S., while others either did not engage in negotiations with the U.S. or have offered terms that, in his judgment, do not sufficiently address imbalances in their trade relationship or have failed to align sufficiently with the U.S. on economic and national security matters.
The latest salvo came amid legal challenges against Trump's use of emergency economic powers. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit on Thursday heard arguments in cases brought against Trump's blanket tariffs targeting different countries as questions linger over the effectiveness of Trump's grand plans or even whether he will hold firm on his most dramatic threats.
In the flight, the co-pilot and the pilot were flying in. The captain and the pilot were monitoring.
All right, joining us live from Washington, D.C. is Raymond E. Vickery. Raymond E. Vickery has been a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Trade Development and is currently Senior Associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Vickery, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to be with WION.
Now, Mr. Vickery, of course, let's begin by talking about what has happened. Of course, we have about a week's time before these tariffs do take effect. Just overall, what is your assessment of this tariffs and trade reshaping that Trump has undertaken?
Well, thanks very much for having me. It seems to me that in regard to these tariffs, it's important to understand that the relationship for security is affected by what happens in economic engagement. They're not two different worlds. Two great democracies, for example, like India and the United States, need to work closely together, and it's impossible to do so if you have the kind of friction which has been created by the Trump approach to tariffs. It is very much in the interest of the world to have a system which we've had since World War II under the General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade, and then the World Trade Organization for resolving disputes and coming to agreements which provide for a most favored nation treatment across the board. This bilateral approach of a real estate developer that it's my way or the highway, and we're going to win and you're going to lose, and I'm going to make money out of this and I'll make more money than you do, is exactly the wrong mindset. The so-called reciprocal tariffs are not reciprocal at all. What they are is an attempt at really self-aggrandizement by the President of the United States to force other nations into compliance with what his view of trade deficits is. He views trade deficits quite wrongly as some sort of profit and loss. And if you have a trade deficit, you're losing. If you have a trade surplus, you're winning. Any economist will tell you that is not right, that there are a variety of issues and factors which go into questions of trade deficit, and it's really a matter of domestic savings as much as anything. I think that you've rightly noted today that there has been a hearing before the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit on whether or not President Trump has the authority at all to do what he is doing. It was first ruled against him, and it seems to me that what's going on here is a disregard for standards, rules of law, both internationally and nationally. You pointed out what has happened here with the WTO is basically destructive of it. That is not at all what nations of the world have agreed, and it's not clear that he has the power to do what he's doing domestically in this field, just as he has in other fields domestically in the United States.
Right, Mr. Vickery, and as you've mentioned, it's also important to understand the intent here. Is it strictly falling in the purview of balancing the trade imbalances which are there, create a symmetry over there, or is there something else at play? And having said that, I'd like to get your opinion on what's happening with India and US, particularly with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying that the US President is quite frustrated with the negotiations, and then Secretary of State Marco Rubio coming in and saying that Russian oil also happens to be a major irritant. Now, what do you make of these latest developments?
Well, I think that it shows the weakness of this approach to international trade. It can't be the case that you just go in and try to create a fortress America economically, that we don't need the rest of the world and we're gonna cut them off. Now, there are issues such as the Russian issue which ought to be addressed. There's no question that Russia, in my mind, has violated the UN Charter, non-aggression. This is an imperialistic approach which India has opposed imperialism from the very start. And India needs to think about what it's doing in regard to Russia. But that does not mean that you simply go in and on a unilateral basis say you do what I tell you to, or you're going to be cut off completely. I think that that there is very little understanding on the part of President Trump of the dynamics of security and economic relations in all of South Asia. You see that he's reached some sort of agreement, and of course on all these agreements you can't really tell what the agreement is because they haven't been released and they're just frameworks. But what he's done with Pakistan and linking Pakistan with India is counterproductive and counter to what Republican and Democratic presidents all the way from Bill Clinton through George W. Bush, Obama, and even in the first administration of Trump have done. And it is not at all productive of long-term peace and prosperity, either for India, for the United States, or for the world.
Absolutely, Mr. Vickery. Of course, it's interesting to say the least, but we'll have to track the situation closely and see how it actually develops. But for now, thank you so much for making time for us and sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you.